The day my son-in-law stood in my living room and told me I had stolen from my own daughter, I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just looked at him, really looked at him, and I thought, you have no idea what's coming. But let me back up. Because this story doesn't start with that moment. It starts about 40 years earlier in a 2-bedroom house in Dayton, Ohio, where I raised my daughter on a schoolteacher's salary and a whole lot of prayer. My name is June. I'm 63 years old, and I have spent the better part of my life doing things the quiet way. Paying bills on time, keeping my word, showing up. My late husband, Robert, used to say I was the most dependable person he'd ever met. He passed 11 years ago, heart attack, no warning, and after that, I kept doing what I'd always done. I showed up. I kept going. I moved into a smaller house in Kettering, taught 4th grade for 3 more years, then retired on a modest pension and the savings Robert and I had built together over 32 years of marriage. It wasn't a fortune, but it was ours. And after Robert died, it was mine. My daughter, I'll call her my daughter because that's what she is, the whole of her, not just her name. She's 41 now. She was 26 when she met him. He came into her life like a gust of wind, the kind that feels refreshing at first and then slams the door shut behind it. He had a firm handshake and a good job in commercial real estate, and a way of talking that made everything sound like he already knew the answer. She was dazzled. I tried to be happy for her. I really did. The wedding was in September 7 years ago. I wore a blue dress and danced with my grandson, her son from before, 8 years old, and the spitting image of Robert. My daughter looked beautiful. Her husband looked pleased with himself. I should have paid more attention to that distinction. The first few years were fine, or at least they looked fine from the outside. They bought a house in a suburb east of Columbus. He got a promotion. She went back to work part-time after their baby together, a little girl, was born. I drove up every few weeks to help. I babysat. I brought food. I fixed things around their house because I'd always been handy and they never seemed to have time. I didn't notice at first when things started to shift. It was small things. He would make comments at dinner, little offhand remarks about how I must be sitting on a nice nest egg from Robert's life insurance. I'd laugh it off. Then he started asking questions. Not in an obvious way. In the way that men like him ask questions, sideways, buried in conversation, like they're just making small talk. So did you ever invest that money, June? Real estate's been good lately. I could help you look at some options. I always said no, politely. I always changed the subject. My daughter never seemed to notice. Or maybe she noticed and didn't want to see it. I don't know. That's the part that still hurts the most, if I'm honest. Then Robert's mother passed. She was 91, God rest her, and she left behind a small estate, a house in Indiana that sold for about $240,000, divided among her 3 children. Robert's share would have gone to me. It did go to me. It was processed through the estate, handled by a lawyer, clean and straightforward. I didn't tell many people. I put most of it in a money market account and set some aside for my grandchildren's education. That was the plan Robert and I had always talked about. If something came to us late in life, it went toward the kids. That was just who we were. But somehow my son-in-law found out. I don't know exactly how. I think my daughter mentioned it, not thinking anything of it. She trusted him completely. She always had. About 2 weeks after the estate settled, he called me. Not a visit, a phone call. Very casual, very smooth. He said he and my daughter had been talking, and they were thinking about refinancing the house and investing in a rental property, and they were a little short on the down payment, and they were wondering if I might be willing to loan them $80,000. He said loan, but the way he said it. The pause, the slight emphasis, told me he didn't mean it that way at all. I said I'd think about it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed in my quiet house in Kettering, and I stared at the ceiling and I thought about Robert, about what he would have said. He would have said, "Trust your gut, June." He always said that. My gut said no. I called my daughter the next day and told her I didn't think it was the right time for me to make a large loan, that I was still figuring out my own finances, that I hoped she understood. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Of course, Mom," in a voice that told me he was probably in the room. A month passed, 2 months. Then, in February, I drove up for my granddaughter's birthday party. Pink balloons, grocery store cake, the kids running in circles in the backyard. I was washing dishes after the party when my son-in-law walked into the kitchen and closed the door behind him. He didn't raise his voice. That's what I want you to understand. He never raised his voice. He spoke quietly and with complete confidence, the way people do when they believe they hold all the cards. He told me that he knew about the inheritance. He told me that under Ohio law, and he said Ohio law with the ease of someone who had looked it up, a spouse's inheritance could sometimes be considered marital property, depending on how it was handled. He said he wasn't making any accusations, but that if I had been advising my daughter to keep certain financial information from him, that could be a problem. He said the word advising the way someone else might say manipulating. Then he said, "I think it would be better for everyone if you reconsidered helping us out." I turned off the faucet. I dried my hands on the dish towel. I turned around and I looked at him standing there in his khakis and his press shirt and I said, very calmly, "I'll need to speak with my attorney before I respond to that." He smiled, like he'd won something. He hadn't. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known because my daughter didn't know either, because I had never told anyone, was that Robert and I had set up a revocable living trust years ago. 1998. We'd done it quietly, on the advice of a financial planner, after Robert's father had a messy probate situation that tied up the family for 3 years. Everything Robert and I had built together, including what came to us after he was gone, was held in that trust. My name, my trustee, my terms. The inheritance from Robert's mother had gone directly into the trust account, which meant it was, without any ambiguity, my separate property, not marital, not shared. Mine. My attorney, a woman I'd been working with for over a decade, sharp as a tack and twice as precise, confirmed it in writing within 48 hours. She also noted, gently but clearly, that what my son-in-law had said to me in that kitchen could be construed as financial coercion. She used that phrase exactly. Financial coercion. She said I had options. I thought about those options for about a week. What I kept coming back to wasn't the money. It was my daughter. It was the look on her face at that birthday party, laughing with the kids, not knowing what her husband had just done 15 feet away in her own kitchen. It was my grandson, 12 by then, who called me every Sunday evening without fail. It was my granddaughter with the pink frosting on her nose. I didn't want a war. I wanted my family back, so I did something that probably surprised everyone, including myself. I called my daughter and I asked if I could take her to lunch. Just the two of us. She said yes, and I could hear the careful neutrality in her voice, the way she'd learned to manage the space between her husband and me. We went to a diner we used to go to when she was in high school. Booths with cracked vinyl, the best pie in the county. I ordered coffee. She ordered tea, and I told her everything. Not in a dramatic way. Not with accusations or ultimatums. I told her what her husband had said to me in the kitchen. I told her what my attorney had said. I showed her the letter. I'd brought a copy, folded in my purse. I watched her face as she read it. She read it twice. Then she set it down on the table and looked out the window for a long moment, and I didn't say anything. I just let her sit with it. When she looked back at me, her eyes were wet. She said, "Mom, this isn't the first time he's done something like this." She said it so quietly I almost didn't hear her over the diner noise. And then it all came out. She told me about the joint account he'd opened in both their names without telling her, then gradually moved money out of. She told me about the credit card debt she'd discovered 6 months ago, run up in her name, things she hadn't bought, trips she hadn't taken. She told me about the times he'd gone through her phone, the passwords he'd made her share, the way he tracked her location and called it concern, the way he had isolated her, slowly and methodically, from the people who would have told her the truth. She hadn't told me any of this. She'd been ashamed. She'd thought she could fix it herself. She'd thought things would get better. I reached across the table and I took both her hands in mine and I said, You didn't do anything wrong. None of this is your fault. I said it the same way I used to say it when she was 8 years old and crying over something at school, and I saw her face crumple the way it had back then, and we sat there in that vinyl booth and cried together over our coffee and our tea. But crying wasn't going to be enough. I knew that. I had already spoken to my attorney. Now I helped my daughter find one of her own, a family law attorney, a woman who came highly recommended and specialized in cases involving financial abuse. My daughter was reluctant at first. She kept saying, "But the kids, Mom, what about the kids?" And I kept saying, "That's exactly why. The kids." The next several months were not easy. I won't pretend they were. My son-in-law, once he understood what was happening, became a very different kind of man. Not the smooth, controlled version I'd seen in that kitchen, but something angrier and more desperate underneath. He made accusations. He told people in their social circle that I had been interfering in their marriage for years, that I had turned my daughter against him, that I was the reason their family was falling apart. Some people believed him. That hurt. It always hurts when people believe the louder voice over the truer one. But there were things he couldn't spin. The credit card statements were real. The transferred funds were real. The text messages, some of which my daughter had quietly screenshot over the months before she told me anything, were real. Her attorney subpoenaed the financial records, and what came out of that process was far worse than any of us had expected. He had been systematically draining their joint finances for at least 3 years. Some of it had gone into a separate account my daughter didn't know existed. Some of it, and this is the part that still makes my chest tight when I think about it, had gone to another woman. Someone he'd been seeing for 2 years. Someone in the same industry, same city, who also didn't know about my daughter. The divorce was finalized 11 months after that lunch at the diner. My daughter got the house. She got primary custody of both kids. She got a financial settlement that her attorney negotiated carefully, accounting for the hidden assets, the dissipated marital funds, all of it. He got supervised visitation and a debt repayment schedule that was going to follow him for a long time. He never got $1 of my inheritance. I want to tell you where we are now, because I think that matters more than the legal outcome. My daughter is 41 years old, and she is, for the first time in years, herself again. I see it every time I visit. She laughs differently. Easier, lower, like she doesn't have to measure it first. She's gone back to the nursing career she put on hold. She takes the kids on little road trips, just the 3 of them, and texts me pictures from rest stops and roadside attractions. My grandson is 15 now. He still calls me every Sunday. Last spring he built a birdhouse in his backyard and sent me a video of the first bird that moved in, a wren. Small and fast and very sure of itself. My granddaughter started kindergarten. She lost her first tooth at my house, sitting at my kitchen table eating an apple, and she held it up and screamed with the kind of pure delight that only exists in 5-year-olds. I think about that sometimes when people ask me if I regret how things went. If I wish I'd just given him the money and kept the peace. I don't. The peace we had wasn't real. It was just quiet. There's a difference between a house being silent and a house being safe. I know that now more clearly than I have ever known anything in my life, and so does my daughter. Last Christmas, the first one in the new apartment she found for herself, small but hers, with a balcony she's already covered in plants. She made the same apple pie her grandmother used to make, the one I taught her when she was 10. The kids helped, flour everywhere, the smoke alarm going off twice, because they'd turned the oven up too high. We ate it at 8 o'clock at night after the kids were supposed to be in bed, all 4 of us in our socks on her kitchen floor, and it was the best pie I have ever tasted. She looked at me across the table that night, her eyes tired and happy, at the same time the way they get, and she said, "Thank you for not letting it go, Mom." I told her I didn't do it for her. I did it for the woman she was, before she forgot she was allowed to be that woman. She cried. I cried. The kids asked if we were okay and we said yes, which was the most honest thing either of us had said in a very long time. Because we were. We really, finally were.